Hello and welcome to the Folklore Podcast Book Club. Today, Tracy and I thought we would talk about a book which isn't a new publication, but is something which intersects with the world of folklore and is a book that we both read relatively recently, and that book is Lanny by Max Porter. You'll find a review of Lanny on the Folklore Podcast website, written by Tracy. How did you first come across the book?
In a very strange way, actually. I did something that I virtually never do, and I entered a competition on Facebook. There's a community bookstore not too far from where we live, and they were running a competition where the prize was, I think, a 6-monthly subscription to their book club, where they send you a book a month, which you can read and enjoy. And so I asked them to challenge me and take me to genres that I probably wouldn't have chosen for myself. And this was actually the second book that I was sent. And I sort of glanced through it, and there was something about it which instantly captivated me and made me really curious. And that is, if I show you an example, it's the way that some of the pages are presented. Let's see if I can find... Actually, one of the ones from later on might be better.
Yeah, it's got to be said that Max Porter, the author of this book, is a former bookseller and an editor, and so is well used to working with books and typography,
yes.
Which is why I guess this was done in this way.
Yeah, so if I can sort of show that to the camera. Now have a look at that. Isn't that amazing? Now this is snippets of conversation from people in a village which are being overheard by the sort of mystical folkloric character Dead Papa Toothwort. And the way it's written, you kind of have to turn the book a little bit to follow the sort of undulations of the type. But it's just a fascinating way of presenting. Some of them even overlap each other. So it's kind of like a sort of printed representation of what it would be like overhearing conversation at a dinner party, for example, with everybody sort of having their own little thoughts and snippets of discussion intersecting, overlapping each other.
Yeah, it's how the natural kind of village gossip mechanic would work in the street, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
So Max Porter was longlisted in the past for the Man Booker Prize, for the Wainwright, for the Gordon Byrne Prize. So there's quite a catalogue of accolade there. We don't want to go too much into spoiler territory for those that haven't read it, but
Hopefully
what's
not.
the main premise of this book?
Lanny is a young lad who is very, very attuned to nature. To the point where Dead Papa Toothwort, who is kind of like the sort of nature spirit, basically. Is that how you describe
He's
him?
almost like a Green Man character, isn't he?
But he morphs, he changes. He's 1 minute he's the size of an ant crawling through the mulch, and then the next he's the size of a telegraph pole striding across the fields. So he kind of morphs into and out of not only nature itself, but the detritus left behind by man. So Lanny is a nature child. He loves going into the woods. One of the first descriptions of him is his mother saying that he sort of appears stage left stinking of pine. So that instantly to me showed that his mother understands him, understands nature, is comfortable with both, whereas Lanny's father looks at Lanny and is completely mystified. This child, his own child, is a mystery to him.
As is the surrounding in which they now find themselves. I guess.
Yeah. They've moved to the countryside. He works in the city, and so he kind of comes back, and it's what's all this stuff around me? So he's if anybody's read my review of Melmoth, which was actually the first book I got from this subscription prize I won. You'll see that there was some discussion of unlikable characters, and to me Robert, Lanny's father, does fit very much into that category. I really didn't get on with Robert at all. In my opinion, he needed a good talking to. Now Lanny is described by Dead Papa Toothwort, as an example, as young and ancient all at once, a mirror and a key. So right from the beginning, you kind of get that impression of Lanny as being significant to nature.
Yeah.
And you could look at him all the way through, I think, as a metaphor for the natural world.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, this is a book that's full of tropes, if you like, isn't it? This is something that we find often in folklore and folk tales. Lanny is essentially a modern folk tale, so it's looking at that kind of English rurality. It's looking at that sense of otherness that we often find in folk tales as well,
which the
isn't it?
village kind of dynamic helps to bring out, because these people have come in from outside. They are others. And they at one point during the book, do you remember, about 2/3 of the way through, they start looking at the family from other people's viewpoints, and you see both sides of one conversation, from the sort of very staid, conservative, long-time village resident, and Lanny's mum, the newcomer, the outsider, and how differently those two people interpret the same interaction, which is quite fascinating.
Yes, and there's a very large sense of an environmental message, I think, in this book as well.
So.
This kind of rural English life and nature is a big part of this as well. It put me in mind in a lot of ways, for those that have seen it, of the reboot of Wurzel Gummidge that Mackenzie Crook
it's very
has
similar
written.
to that.
Again, it has an environmental message, a very important environmental message, but it doesn't push it down your throat like some things do. It's just there as... In the same way that morality and these sorts of things are often part of folk tales, so this environmental message and this oneness with nature is very much part of this one. But there's a flip side to that too, isn't there? There's this sense of decay and entropy within the book as well.
Yeah, I mean, right from the very beginning, some of the words that Max Porter uses to describe dead Papa Toothwort, things like bitumen, tarmac bubbles, rust and mulch, cloying, earthy. There's a sense of decay with it, which kind of continues on. Lanny at one point mentions to one of the characters that autumn is his favourite season. Again, you've got mulch, you've got decay, you've got earthiness. So it's almost, I mean, the way I interpreted it, and this is just one possible interpretation of a number you could have, is that Lanny represents the earth, his connection with the earth, and that echoes what is happening to the natural world under the influence of man at the moment. So you could say that, for example, all of the decay is what is going on now as we humans run unchecked through our lives, polluting everything, leaving rubbish, that sort of thing. So Lanny is kind of linked with dead Papa Toothwort right from the very beginning. There's this sort of theme of decay in nature, as Lanny is kind of beset by the people around him, who some of whom get him, some of whom don't, most of whom don't. And I kind of saw Lanny as the metaphor for nature because of how his storyline progresses through the book.
Yes, he very much is, isn't he? And I think another thing which comes out of this kind of nature aspect in this book is the colour palette that you get a sense of when you're reading it. If you were synesthesic, for example, you would be seeing greens and browns. You see them in your mind's eye, but you would be seeing them on the page as you read this.
Yeah.
With notable exceptions where they want to bring out different aspects of the story. There's a bit towards the end, isn't there, where almost like a dream sequence, there's this kind of raffle that takes place, and suddenly there's the colour of the raffle tickets, the pink raffle tickets, become a big deal, because for the whole book you've been very much in this kind of nature palette of oranges and russets and greens. It's fascinating the way that comes across, isn't it?
And that the raffle, without giving too much away, is also kind of, I view it as the tipping point of where we are in the world today as humans. The outcome of that raffle basically hinges on how you interact with nature. If you interact with nature well, you are more likely to be rewarded, because nature will then be able to continue on and sustain you. If you don't act with nature well, then you will suffer the ultimate penalty.
Yeah.
So hopefully that's not too spoilery.
No, I don't think so. And
Was it vague enough to not be spoilery?
And dead Papa Toothwort as a nature spirit is kind of a guide through how people should be feeling, I guess, in a way as well. So he's very antagonistic in many ways as a character, but he also has this duality about him. So in one sense he opposes the adults in the story and sides very much with Lanny as a child, but then in another sense he kind of directs the adults into what they should be doing, how they should be behaving, how they should be caring for Lanny as a child, and therefore if Lanny is a trope for nature,
it's how we should
caring
be
for nature and
for the
caring
world,
for the environment is the message, isn't it?
Very much so.
As well.
And the one at the end of the book, those who have interacted with Lanny in the right way are the ones who ultimately will get rewarded.
Yes.
Which I also hope is not too spoilery. Yeah, I mean, there's lots of things that you can pick out. I'm going to go back to Robert. Things that show that he's totally out of step with basically his entire family. He doesn't really interact with Jolie particularly, his wife. And he certainly is clueless about his own son, to the point where, right at the very beginning, is a really clever little short paragraph which kind of sums Robert up beautifully and tells you pretty much everything you need to know about him, which the later sort of discussions with Robert only serve to enhance, which is that when his boss is going, "Oh, how's your son? Still mental?" And he goes, "Oh, yeah, well, you know." And he perpetuates this about his own child. And I was reading this going, oh my God, what are you like?
And yes, there is this sense, isn't there, that
it's awful.
If you are in tune with nature and in tune with the countryside or your surroundings, that how somehow that makes you mad or unstable or suspicious or wrong in some way. Other. In the same way as, you know, historically those who were like that were seen as other, weren't they?
Absolutely. It's the modern day version. And one of the things that I do like is there is actually a wonderful little couplet which Lanny actually tells to an adult friend of his, an artist called Pete, who he takes drawing lessons from. It says, "Say your prayers and be good too, or dead Papa Toothwort is coming for you." So I love that. I think that's absolutely brilliant.
Yes, and again, that paints this kind of bogeyman character almost as well. Again, it's very common, isn't it, in folklore and myth as well.
Yeah.
Of course, Pete is an interesting character because he's the kind of redeeming feature as far as male characters are concerned in this book, isn't he? Because if you want to have a male character to identify with, then Pete, the artist, is probably the easiest one to do that with, because
definitely.
he is more in tune with Lanny's thinking, and therefore is more in tune with the whole kind of rurality of the tale.
Yeah, and you will find that the people who interact well with Lanny and have an understanding and appreciation of what and who Lanny is are the people who ultimately have the most positive outlook on life generally. I'm not going to sort of say who does and who doesn't or anything like that, or introduce any other characters into that context, but it's all very much because when I first read it, I didn't like the ending. That didn't work for me, and I needed to go back and read it again after I actually wrote my review. And if you take it in the context of looking at how we treat the world as humans in real life, then yes, that ending does work. But I think for me it was a little bit, I don't know, I kind of thought it was unnecessary and not necessarily overdone, but maybe hammered it home a little bit more than the rest of the book did, which is maybe why I didn't kind of enjoy it quite as much. But the end of the book actually is interesting because all the way through, the only person who never actually speaks directly is Lanny himself. So it's kind of like we don't hear from the subject of the book. We talk around it, we talk about it, we talk over it, and it's only at the end that it actually gets to speak for itself. And again, you could see that as a metaphor for nature. We are, as humans, talking over it, talking around it, ignoring it, reporting what it's doing, but not actually sitting down and having a proper discussion with it. And it's only once we have chosen our path that we will get actual interaction of either a positive or negative nature, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
It absolutely does.
Good.
Yeah. So, in a nutshell, it's a book that is challenging on many levels. Typographically challenging, if you like,
but
fun, with an immensely important message. And it is a book which is essentially, as I say, a modern folk tale. So, if you enjoy folk tales and that kind of mythos, it's a book that you definitely should be exploring. And if you have any sense of oneness with nature and with your surroundings, again, it's a book that I think you'll want to explore to see if you identify with it in the same way as we have, or in the same way that some of the characters do too.
And it's also got that element of folk horror, hasn't it? It's got an isolated, insular village community.
Oh, absolutely.
And you could interpret Dead Popper Toothwort as a folk horror character quite easily.
Absolutely. So once again, Tracy's review of Lanny by Max Porter is on the Folklore Podcast website if you want to remind yourself of what she thought of it. The book itself is published by Faber and Faber, widely available in all good bookshops and online places as normal. Do support your independent bookshop wherever possible, is the message that you will always get from us on the Folklore Podcast Book Club. Do seek it out if this is of interest to you and see what you think of it. And if you have read it or you do read it, drop us an email, drop us a comment, post on our Twitter or social media, and let us know what you think and we'll have a chat about it. So we'll be back soon with another episode of the Folklore Podcast Book Club. In the meantime, look after yourselves, keep reading, and if you come across any books that you enjoy, do get in touch and let us know. And we can feature them on here ourselves. You can come on and talk about them too. It's great to speak to you all again, and we shall be back very soon. Bye-bye now.
Bye.